with Ryan.
Today we are learning basketball with Matt Babcock, former agent, current scout. You can find his work at Babcock Hoops. Check out the site with a great team of, diehard scouting people there. And, I'm really excited to dive into, this draft class in the 2025 NBA draft, the NIL landscape in college, and hear a little bit about your journey in basketball and your background. But before we do, how are you doing today, Matt?
No, I'm doing great. Ryan, thanks for having me. And any opportunity to talk hoops, I'm here for it.
Hey, I can relate to that. It's always fun talking hoops anytime, anywhere. And, before we dive into some of the other stuff, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and, as an agent, just all the different roles really that are involved in basketball, from the front office side, the scouting side, the coaching to agent. How did you get into all this, and, what have some of those experiences sort of helped shape and mold your perspective on the game?
Yeah, sure. I was born into it. My dad and my uncles have all worked in basketball since before I was born, and my two uncles were general managers. My dad's worked as a front office member. He was interim general manager of the Bucks for a little while, and he was a college coach for 15 years before getting into the NBA. So I grew up in it, and it was one of those things where not only did I grow up in it, I chose basketball at a young age. I mean, I've been passionate about it since I could remember. Wanted to be the next Michael Jordan, and ended up being a decent high school player and played in college. But really knew that I always had a path, or wanted to have a path to work in basketball, and coach for a little bit. I was a player development coach to start. My first full time job was assistant coach, player development coach for Virtus Bologna, EuroLeague team in Italy, and then kind of just fell into the agency business. Being a young guy, just sort of jumping at the best opportunities in basketball I could, and that was my best opportunity at that time. And took a job with Excel Sports Management, and that just sort of turned into a pretty crazy roller coaster of a journey as a young sports agent. Worked for a number of big companies. Ultimately, had my own company and represented a number of NBA guys, a ton of guys overseas, and during that process, had some success and was improving as an agent. But the more I went on, I really sort of missed being closer to my roots of actually having a directly basketball related role. As an agent, you're more handling managing the business for your clients. And I grew up as a coach's son, and then scout's son. And so I after a couple of years of sort of thinking about this, I got my wife to get on board and allowed me to make a dramatic move in my early 30s to get into scouting. I was volunteer scouting for Marty Blake and Associates, Ryan Blake, who's Marty Blake's son, scouting service that was originally put on by the NBA. And during that time, Sports Illustrated reached out to me, wanted me to write a series of stories about the NBA draft process. And, so during that time, I just kind of was getting my feet wet on scouting and kind of seeing the influence and the power of media. Put together Babcock Hoops, and been doing it ever since. And really, having this presence in the media, it's opened up a lot of unique doors. I've done a lot of side deals, as a scouting advisor, different advisory roles for different individuals and entities in basketball. And really just kind of seeing the game and different levels of the game from feels like all different angles. And so just really feel appreciative to have so much experience in basketball, because it's like my friend Fran Fraschilla says, when you work in basketball, you really don't work at all. I mean, I do what I love, and just very appreciative to be doing everything that I am.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Big fan of Fran as well, and it's a great point. Like, just being able to watch hoops at any level it's not work. Talking hoops, watching hoops is very easy to get up and just enjoy that all day. So, that's a really interesting perspective, especially on kind of the website and scouting side as well. Just I'm interested if you could dive in a little more of that into what sort of opportunities kind of open up with the media side, and just kind of how your scouting perspective can not only be put out onto the website, but you can also become maybe a consultant with a team, or your connections in the past also with other agents and players, and kind of balancing all that and finding opportunity to, use your basketball experience and knowledge to, help others make decisions.
Yeah, sure. I guess a little bit more context in the background of Babcock Hoops. So when I first started it, I teamed up with a handful of friends of mine that were NBA scouts or former NBA scouts that were in between jobs, and really kind of looked to create a platform, for somewhere, for these guys to go, to kind of stay in the mix, stay scouting, and getting credentials to games until they figure out their next stop. And so what we did was, essentially simulated that we were our own NBA front office. With me simulating that I was the general manager of the front office, we kind of used our big board and mock draft as far as making group decisions, and really used it as an exercise to inform ourselves, to figure out our next stuff. That was my plan back then, was to kind of recreate my identity. I became frustrated that I was looked at just primarily as a sports agent at that point, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw a basketball guy. Somebody, like I mentioned, that grew up in my family and was an aspiring player and then coach. And so I really felt the need to sort of recreate myself. And then, as we kind of got along with that process, it kind of took on a life of its own. And I never ultimately took a full time position with an NBA team. But what it did is, I think I did a pretty good job of recreating my identity. I think most people see me now as a scout more so than an agent or a former agent. And it just kind of opened up unique opportunities. I've been an advisor for different events. The Tampa Bay Pro Combine, I was a big part of that for a while. Damian Lillard's former Zero. I assisted on the player selection committee for that. And I've consulted for a number of teams, scouting, intel gathering type stuff. Actually, was hired a few years ago as a scouting advisor for the team Virtus Bologna that I coached for when I was in my early 20s. And so different deals like that. And I still, my involvement in the agency business has been, I still sort of mentor some young agents where I kind of put together sort of like private sort of lessons for guys that are sort of developing as agents. So yeah, it really kind of worn two different hats as far as being an NBA draft analyst and scout, which is primarily public facing, but then doing some of these consulting deals on the side and kind of staying in the mix on different layers of the game.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and definitely can say that the rebrand has been successful. And
Thank you.
I enjoy your scouting work, and that's a super interesting thing that I've also kind of toyed with. The idea is that basketball is a business, and I would love to kind of break into that business myself, but you have to kind of consider all these different factors between the business side, where there's a lot of money between exchanging through a lot of different channels to get players to go certain places to, like, just to find more information, versus the actual basketball, like scouting the basketball, playing the basketball, coaching it, whatever is your niche. It's just, it's a giant world out there. And you kind of dive into it on a recent article on the NIL landscape and the college scene. And I think it's a super interesting time with college basketball, where you wrote a great piece kind of laying out how college programs essentially have to adapt maybe a model similar to the NBA, where there's a front office in place, where there's scouts and possibly a GM or someone in that sort of role who can help build a roster so a coach can focus on coaching. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because at the NBA level, we used to see in certain individuals kind of get both roles. Like they would hire maybe a Stan Van Gundy or a Doc Rivers to both coach and be the GM, and it's just that's too many jobs for one person. Really, is what it boils down to. Like they can have great opinions and they can understand team building and and coaching and all these things, but it's just a lot to ask one man to not only lead the entire team but scout the entire world and put those things together. So I would love to hear your thoughts on what college basketball could look like in the near future. And I think we're seeing it already. I believe it was UNC that has started really hiring a big front office, like multiple people to help them build that roster. So, I would love to dive in to your recent article on Babcock Hoops, where it's titled "The Evolution of College Basketball, NIL, Transfer Portal, and Professionalization on the Wild Wild West Era, and just the need for scouting and front office and kind of balancing the responsibilities between coach and GM."
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I think so many different thoughts kind of pop in my head when talking about college basketball right now, and I think from like a surface level view, it's chaos. But then also when you peel back the curtain, it's chaos, and so it's continued to evolve. It's very unorganized at the moment, but sort of the point of the article as a whole is that with all these moving parts and this evolution assumed continued evolution and dramatic change, that there's a need to change things up. And North Carolina is a perfect example. I think they're going very aggressive on this. I mean, it was reported that they hired Jim Tanner, a long time sports agent, and a very buttoned up sort of corporate lawyer type, presence in the space. And then where was his salary is north of $1 million, and so that is a big splash. And also read that they're also hiring Buzz Peterson in some type of role. I'm assuming it'll be Jim sort of oversees everything. He's got probably a stronger hand in the business side of it. And Buzz is a former coach, former player, longtime NBA executive. He's probably going to be a little bit more heavier influence on personnel. And so they're spending a lot of money to build out one of these staffs that I'm talking about. I don't think many programs will have the resources to do it on that level. But I do think the concept of bringing in people to specialize in certain areas of the back end business, I just think there's a desperate need for it. And the way I kind of see it is, depending on if you're a mid major to a blue blood, there's a need to really designate people for these roles. Because what you said before, being a coach, whether it be a head coach or an assistant coach, that's a full-time job by itself. And with the constant roster construction, it's just too much for those staffs to handle by themselves. Not to mention that I think the sort of the landscape and the protocols in place, they're very sophisticated. I mean, the recruiting, the player identification process, just evaluation processes, and then not even including the business part of dealing with agents and negotiations and that kind of putting together a team with whatever your budget is. It's high level stuff. And I mentioned in the article, it's not like there's not coaches out there capable of handling these things. I just think they're two different jobs. I mean, it's kind of the same idea of like, all right, I've been a sports agent and I've been a scout. I can't do both, and so it's that's sort of the concept in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting where the landscape is going, and Wild Wild West is a great way to put it. I mean, there's just a lot of money out there, and with the NIL rules, basically just, or I should say, lack of rules, where people have incentives to get certain people and certain players in certain areas, and everyone is just following their own incentives. So I'm super interested to see if some sort of body or rules come into place to actually put some structure around that. So, there's less mayhem with the transfer portal and like being able to transfer before the season ends and all these little deadlines where, a coach could be, I think it was in the past few years, a coach might make it to the Final Four and they might be missing out on transfer prospects because they're too worried on, the Final Four going on. And
right.
They're missing out on some of the best talent. So just a little bit more rules in place.
No, there's no doubt about it. I mean, it's very unorganized right now, and I do think it will happen. I'm not sure exactly how it will happen, but I think there's enough smart people involved in this to eventually get it organized. And obviously, I think a lot of it's dependent on different federal rulings and whatnot. But I mean, I do think more order and organization is in the near future. And what I'm hoping is that, to your point, is that they'll ultimately be multi-year deals. So now all of a sudden, this will be very similar to how business is done overseas with international basketball, where these teams are having to put together new teams, constantly. But there's certain cases where you're signed 2-3 year deals. There's cases where guys are under contract with a big program and they're on loan to a smaller club. Stuff like that. Like I mean that's where I think the college basketball world could get interesting. Of okay, maybe the Dukes of the world to do a big ticket deal on an 18-year-old, but he plays at Colorado State for a couple of years, or maybe he's on loan at a JUCO, but he's being paid by a big school. I mean, there's all these different things that I think this could go. I think some of that might even be a little bit more over my head as far as the legal parts of it. But I do think stuff like this will be put in place eventually, and that's where I think at that point I'm hoping it will be in hindsight where we're living in a time where this is the step backward for 2 steps forward. And I do see a scenario where the product as a whole is better. I mean, there's no turning back here on the kids getting paid. But I mean, if we're able to kind of get things more organized, and say these schools are putting together these staffs like I'm suggesting. Now the coaching's better, the rosters are better because these guys are older, more mature physically, mentally. They've been coached up better. Now all of a sudden we've got really high level basketball on the floor. You can just think about what we're doing from an NBA draft standpoint. I'm already facing it, having to put together a second round for our big board because it's all older guys now. And I think the day and age where we're writing off a 24-year-old because the lack of upside, yeah, that might still be in place for a lottery pick, not a second round pick, because they're all going to be like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, good basketball players, just quote unquote, are being prioritized later in the draft, and that potential, that stigma that, like you said, the older prospects might be tapped out on potential that just might not be true once you exit the lottery. And there's a lot of Janai Broom comes to mind, where he'll probably he could be a possible player of the year, but maybe he'll get picked in the late 20s and a little bit older, or a Cam Jones who similarly is showing development on the college scene and just a few years older. So it's super interesting there. And for listeners, that this sort of position in the college scene, I believe, is what Adrian Wojnarowski ended up kind of doing with St. Bonaventure. He is the GM of their team now, and he left that whole rumor mill, top of the world with ESPN, to go do this. So obviously he saw a little bit of opportunity here too, and some value, and probably was tired of that lifestyle as well a little bit. But so you also teased in the article that you might be a little interested in this sort of role. So what are you kind of thinking about yourself, and in terms of what you're interested in, whether it's participating or more so covering it on the media side?
Yeah, no, I mean, pretty much what has happened is, I mean, with there just being, so many moving parts, and me sort of having a lot of involvement at arm's length in all the different layers of basketball, people just pick my brain, and I've had some coaches and different people ask me if I'd be interested, in coming on in one of these front office roles, and long story short, yeah, I'm interested. I mean, I think it needs to be, for the right reasons, but the very least, definitely interested in it. And until then, definitely going to keep a pulse on it just from a coverage standpoint, because just as a basketball fan, basketball guy, it's just such an interesting space right now. I mean, I'm so curious, like everybody else, of like where this is going. But it's sort of, I think change can be scary. I think it's sort of overwhelming a lot of people. I'm excited about it. I think ultimately it's going to be a good thing.
Yeah, and I don't know if even the NCAA necessarily saw this coming with all the different rule changes. Like, to me, when they first announced NIL, I was like, okay, the NCAA finally gave players back their own rights to name, image, and likeness, like as if they had some sort of ownership over it because they played a sport in a league. But now it's become like millions of dollars at stake for individual players, and it's not all like top 10 prospects. Like you might go down the board to the 100th best prospect in the world, and he's getting a decent chunk of change too to go play at maybe a lower level college in comparison. So it's very interesting, just kind of everything that blew up after these rule changes. And from there, and from the scouting side of things, what would you say you look for in your scouting process? Whether you're watching film, whether you're in person in the gym, what are you looking for? Let's say when you're watching a prospect and you're trying to determine if he's an NBA level player or if he's a pro overseas or if he's a college player, like, are there any individual attributes either on the court or off the court with intel and personality that you're kind of looking for as a scout?
I think it's a tough question because I try and do things, as far as an evaluation, to come to a comprehensive evaluation. And so even though I come from a place of being trained by old school scouts, I've tried to evolve as a scout myself over time, and I'm continuing to do that. And so I think there's been this sort of like line in the sand, if you will. Like you get your old school traditional scouting, and you've got your modern scouting that lean on analytics and film a lot more. I try to do my best to be as much of a balance in those two worlds as possible. And so I'm trying to collect as many data points as possible, whether it be old school data points as far as like getting nuggets on intel as far as like what the guy's personality is and his habits. And then watching, I watch a lot of games in person, but I watch a ton of film too. And and I do, as far as advanced metrics go, that's a space where I'm continuing to try and get better and better and be open minded of like, okay, how do I implement more concepts into my processes? I'm actually looking at bringing on a couple of analytics interns this pre-draft process for that exact reason of one, giving guys some exposure to what I do, which is admittedly more of an old school approach, but then also trying to help me kind of grow and learn too. And so to answer your question, there's not one thing or a short list of things. I really try and look at everything. And I will say this too is I look at every single player as its own unique case, and sometimes I need more information on one guy more so than the next for whatever reason. But I need enough information to where I'm comfortable in the evaluation to kind of put my stamp on things. Okay, here's how I think he fits into the basketball ecosystem because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I really love that answer and that perspective. I mean, at the end of the day, this is all these different outlets are tools for more information, like you said, to gather data points. And we might not understand every aspect or value everything the same between every scout on earth. Like everyone has a different perspective. Everyone's looking for different things. They value different things, but they're just different tools. So I think that's where consensus can be valuable to kind of you know hear others' opinions and kind of see where maybe you're missing something or you're a little blinded by X, Y, and Z. But yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that answer. I try to do similar style and would add that with uh, say the analytics or the advanced metrics that they help kind of show, in my opinion, they show what happened because we might not be able to see every single thing that happened on the court, and so maybe this player converted 70 or 80% at the rim, and we think of them as a good finisher, but we didn't quite realize how much better of a finisher they are than the field, and that
Right.
and maybe or even recent prospects as well when you start comparing historical prospects with it. So it's a super interesting dynamic there, and
One thing I'd like to add, kind of going back to our previous conversation of the need for college basketball to really beef up their evaluation process. And keep in mind, I grew up as a college coach's son, and so I saw it firsthand of like how that process goes a lot of times. And a lot of it, and it's not like these guys aren't watching film and doing some of the things that we do at the NBA level. But it seemed to me that generally coaches would go watch guys play a tournament and were very impressionable on isolated events and really use the eye test too much. And I think that's all that stuff is great, and that none of that, in my opinion, should ever go away. That's just one part, one kind of slice of the process. There needs to be a whole sophisticated, extensive process to really come to a proper evaluation. And now that these schools are having to spend a lot of their own money on these guys, it puts that much more pressure in that they need to produce right away when they do sign them. It just puts so much more pressure on the evaluation that it needs to be done very professionally. I mean, just going and watching the guy in the tournament and he drops 30, you make him an offer. That feels reckless to me. And you know, and so anyway, I think the overlap with sort of philosophies, I think is just so much more apparent and necessary now.
That's a great point. Like sample size and eye test and memory can be like very tricky, and you might see one player hit 5 elbow midi pull ups or something and be like, oh, he's a mid range assassin, and
Right.
then like he goes 0 for 20 on the rest of the
Yeah,
season.
no, and to your point, the numbers don't lie. I mean, I think if you lean on them completely, that's where you can get in some trouble. But like at the end of the day, I mean, I go watch a guy and think, oh man, this guy's a great finisher. But then we go look at his numbers and he doesn't finish well. It's like that's interesting, right? I mean, that's got to be noted because it's just I always lean on like sort of like the line I love is from Moneyball where Brad Pitt says, if he's a good hitter, why doesn't he hit good? And it's the simplest thing ever, but like that's how I like looking at metrics. It's like let's simplify this process of like, okay, this guy might have a good shooting stroke, but like if he's not making shots, why is that? And to me, that's a red flag, and one that's hard to get around. And obviously, that's a very simple example of how to use metrics, but it's a good one.
No doubt. Yeah. I mean, like your eyes might see something aesthetically, like maybe the jumper looks really pure and it's just a clean form. But then you go and check the numbers, and he actually isn't much of a shooter. He just
Right.
has a clean looking jump shot. So is they're all valuable tools that can be used together to write up a scouting report. That's why like if I've been getting more into the grassroots scene the last few years, so I don't overrate the smaller sample size of just a few college games or just a March Madness tournament or something. So I can kind
Right.
of do a few different things where I learn about these prospects that are likely to become those top draft picks and top college players down the line, and see them in person, watch the film on them, maybe talk to them for a minute and get a few quotes about their approach and their mentality and maybe what they're developing on, and try to see their mindset of are they worried about their do they think they don't stink, or do they realize X, Y,
Right.
and Z can probably get better in their skill set. So it's cool to kind of put that all together and then find comparable stats and visualize that data and just put it all together to paint a picture of who a player is as a prospect, as a person, and gather that info over a longer sample size, because a college season is 30 games, 35 games, versus these guys might play a couple hundred games that throughout the levels as they rise up through the basketball ranks, that they might show different skill sets and different roles on different teams, different situations, different coaches, and it's important to kind of see if their skills are scalable, or if they are they are who they are no matter what roster or team that they happen to be on. And so you also host a basketball podcast, the Babcock podcast. What would you say you focus on the most on that podcast? But also, any tips for me or anyone else out here trying to, host a basketball podcast and just kind of, share their perspective and do interesting things in the public space.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm one that should be giving advice on how to do a podcast, but yeah, but, so far we've really used it, as sort of a platform for me to kind of sort of provide some narrated stories, some from my upbringing in basketball, working as an agent, just sort of like the scouting trails that I go on. I am in the process of possibly rebranding that and sort of changing the concept a little bit. But yeah, no, I think, like I had mentioned before, when I first started getting into media, I think the media can be used in a great way. I really like the idea of you know using the access that I'm given in the media to gather unique information. And we work hard. We work like NBA scouts, and I'm not trying to suggest that I'm better than anybody, but I do try and use the access and information I get to entertain people, but also provide information. I mean, I think a lot of people within the industry do use our stuff, and really just try and be like a positive contributor to the space as a whole. And being able to get on camera, I mean, we're able to kind of get some additional eyeballs. And, I actually hope that players watch some of our stuff too. And because I just try and, help everybody kind of go in the right direction. And, one thing I learned, when I was an agent is that how much players and parents and coaches and people within the industry use these big boards and mock drafts. And a lot of times, I mean, it influences their decisions. And so I've always kind of taken that to heart once I've stepped over to the media of like, with the younger guys in the second round, I'm very conservative with like who I'm putting in and who I'm not. Not saying that I don't make mistakes on it. I have for sure, but really, really just try and be responsible with what I'm putting out there, whether it be on a podcast, whether it be in an article, or rankings, scout reports, or whatnot.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting how the negotiation of the basketball side will use public space because they don't necessarily have all the tools in place themselves to do all these comparisons and scouting reports and here's all the information perfectly organized for the potential decision maker. It's more like here's what an established person in the industry is saying about my player or my son or my coach or whatever it is. So being able to evaluate players through the media is super interesting. And yeah, I mean, I like personally, I kind of you can see the value in that because I use media, I suppose, in a similar way where I'm just trying to put out good scouting and analytics work, whether it's through the podcast or newsletter, YouTube, writing with Swish Theory as well. Shout out to the Swish team. This Learning Basketball podcast is part of the Swish Theory network. And, it's just a lot of, what I consider smart basketball minds putting out cool ideas, whether it's a long form article on player development or just diving into some of the data for a full scouting report or whatever it really is. But it's just cool to try to be a part of it and carve out a lane, but also put out your thoughts and perspective. And in today's world, it's got to be in every possible media outlet there is. Like you got to write about it, you got to talk about it, you got to put it on a video, got to make a TikTok and a YouTube short about it. Like it just doesn't stop. So it's super interesting to kind of see how some fans might not realize how, like you said, like how useful the media side can be to the private side, and that there's a lot more back and forth and reading and using this information than others might realize to kind of put together everyone's perspective. And I think all of those things kind of build into a consensus where that's where value comes into play, say for the draft, where you see how certain, like if all the outlets view someone as the fifth pick in the draft, then maybe you don't take them at one. Maybe you trade back a little bit because you can add a first and still get the guy that you've been targeting anyway, or you pull. Man, now I'm forgetting the name of the movie. Not Moneyball, but a different sports football movie where they just pick their favorite guy.
Draft day.
Draft day, there it is.
Yeah,
yeah, it's a lot. It's a little cornier, I guess.
yeah. No, I love that movie though too,
Yeah.
and no, I love everything you're saying, and you're spot on. And I think we're in we're in just an interesting space in sports all the way around. I mean, obviously, we talked about the stuff with college basketball and NIL, but I mean, let's talk about the change in sports media too, right? I mean, it's we have so many different, and I think I was sort of at the sort of at the beginning, points of that, starting Babcock Hoops, like an independent media scouting outlet, and I mean there's a lot of them now, right? And it's pretty interesting. And another part of it too. I mean, I grew up with like the old school ESPN Sports Center where it was the vibe was very different. I mean, everything was very positive and fun, but like just informative. And now you've got a lot of media members and personalities just trying to stir the pot. And I don't believe a lot of these guys even believe what they're saying. They're just trying to get clicks and generate some action. And I certainly don't want to be like that in the media. I mean, like I said before, not saying that I'm always right, but I try to be. I work hard. I'm honest. I try and do everything I'm doing with integrity, and I think that's really important. And you asked before providing some advice. I don't think you need it. It sounds like you're on the right path, and so stay with it because that's, in my opinion, the right way of doing it.
Hey, I appreciate that. I appreciate the positivity, and yeah, I mean, on that, the ESPN has especially you can almost tell like a lot of what they do is like let's just turn this into a 2-minute clip and say the most outrageous thing possible.
Right.
Like just bring
And
it
I mean,
back.
obviously that's not the network as a whole, but I mean, there's
Yeah.
just it's just becoming more and more prevalent, and it's frustrating for me because I miss the old way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a lot more fun to just enjoy the sport that you cover and be an ambassador of basketball. Be rooting for guys to make it and continue to develop instead of like hyping them up as the next LeBron and then killing them because they're not. Like
Right,
there's only one LeBron, so
right,
why
right.
why why are we doing that out here? And so on the podcast and some of these stories you're talking about, so you've gotten to see a lot of these lottery prospects and first round picks in person. And I would love to hear a little bit of, just any, whether it's intel or just impressions of seeing these players in person. I know you wrote some articles on the Babcock Hoops website on VJ Edgecombe and Egor Demin, and you also had some thoughts on Joan Berenger that I'd really like to hear because I'm familiar with the others, but I'd love to hear kind of what you see about his game and how you think his skill set will translate to the NBA because you have him rated as a late first round pick.
Yeah, no, so kind of what you were saying before, as far as covering high school, I've been covering high school for years, and so I mean, the idea of getting a head start and sort of setting a baseline on these guys is such an important part of my evaluation process. And obviously, there's certain guys that slip through the cracks that kind of relate bloomers, and you kind of take unorthodox pathways of smaller schools and now transferring two, three, four times. A la Caliph battle Gonzaga. I think he's one of his fifth school, fourth school. But it's so a guy like VJ. I mean, I watched him in high school a lot. I mean, most of these high profile guys. I mean, I've been evaluated on some level or another 4 or 5 years, and but I will say, even though I do value getting the head start a lot, evaluating a guy in their pre-draft year, there's nothing more important. I mean, this is as close as we'll get to a finished product uh, before they get drafted, right? Obviously, the process of their development continues, and we need to project what they'll be like 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. But really kind of getting a grip of okay, this is where they're at before the draft. I spend a lot of time, I spend a lot of money traveling around, um, watching things closely in person. But the guys you mentioned, so VJ, I've seen VJ 3 times in person this year. I was in the Bahamas in November for some of those early season tournaments, and I just watched him at Colorado last week. It's been interesting evaluating VJ. Obviously, very very hyped up in high school. Definitely not a guy that's just kind of jumped on the scene. I mean, he's been relevant for a while. Early evaluation, Baylor early in the season. I was frustrated for him, and I thought the way they played and the way they used him kind of stuck him in the corner. And it was impressive, even though he started slow, wasn't hitting shots at a great rate. Watch him in person, and this is an example of why it's so valuable to go watch in person. Is see, even though he's in a point where he should be frustrated, he didn't show it. He didn't take plays off. He never showed bad body language. Seemed like a great teammate. Played hard every single second of every single possession. And then he's gathering some intel, like, rubbing shoulders with different people that have crossed paths with him. He's a worker. He's a great kid. Every indication is that he's going to continue getting better and probably maximize his talent, which is just as important as anything outside of having the talent, which is obviously a prerequisite being a prospect in the first place. Anyway, fast forward a couple months, and even though I do think they could do a better job of really kind of utilizing his athleticism, his burst, and his ability to make stuff happen on the ball, they're using him more so that way, and he's had more success, and he's had some big, I mean, it's big games, because he's able to create on the ball, and I don't see him as any type of traditional point guard or true point guard, but kind of like in the mold of like Russell Westbrook, who's also not a true point guard, but you want the ball in his hands because this guy is an elite athlete, and we could debate about what his natural feel is and point guard skills. He's able to get to his spots and draw the defense especially in an NBA type of game. That gives him the potential of becoming very special. And so I'm very high on VJ, and I was before the production even came because of all these things. I was able to identify okay, this is a great kid. The shooting's there enough. I mean, I think the foundation is there, and kind of seeing and learning that he's a tough kid that's driven. I think he's gonna be fine as a shooter. Obviously, the shooting has come around, even just within this small sample size of his freshman year. And yeah, no, I love him, and the evaluation process has been fun. I mean, because it hasn't been a real easy one. I mean, I think seeing the guy in a limited role, or more limited than you think it should be, makes the evaluation hard. I mean, it's really easy to see a kid, have the red carpet rolled out for him and he's producing. That's the easy evaluation, right? I mean, a Cooper Flag, like, yeah, we all see the same things. Like, it's really good, right? It's not complicated. I mean, I think the debate would be, okay, how critical are you on him for not being overly dynamic as like an offensive engine type of role? So like that, but like, as far as being able to break that down, that's more of like, okay, how much do you value that, or how much of a red flag is that for you? Evaluation overall, outside of that, is, I think, pretty straightforward. BJ's a little bit different, and so like for me, kind of projecting what he could become. I mean, I'm open to the argument of put him anywhere between 2, 3, and 4. Obviously Dylan Harper and Ace are right there as well, and I currently have VJ at 4, but my evaluation process suggests his upside is just as high as anybody's.
Yeah.
Sorry for being so long-winded. I get a little excited about this stuff. Egor
To
Demin.
jump in real quick
Yeah, sure, yeah.
real quick. Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. Like that change of pace, athleticism is really what stands out. Like it in that smaller role earlier in the season, it feels like he was like he used that athleticism to fly around defensively and make these high flying blocks and just jump past steals. And when the ball is in his hands, that's kind of what I view as his elite skill, is that change of pace, like just the
Right.
ability to explode with the quick first step, and look like he's decelerating and then get to the rim real quick. And that's really what impresses me as well. And I think that athleticism will translate immediately to the next level, where he could be just as special of an outlier athlete at the next level. And maybe it's not quite Thompson twin level athlete, I don't know, but we'll see how that kind of like translates, because I think his defense and athleticism in that sense will translate. And then, like you said, there's enough 3-point shooting there to believe he can be a shooter. Like he's had big games. He's had developed as the season has gone on, and I've also liked his decision making on the field that you mentioned earlier. Like it's improved. Like it might have used to be a little, um, I don't know if tunnel vision is the right word, but just attacking and maybe not seeing the entire floor. But it feels like the game is slowing down a little bit as the season has progressed. So it's definitely interesting to see how high he ends up getting drafted, because I do think, like, generally from what I've seen, Flag and at least Dylan Harper are pretty much top 2 for on most boards that I've seen. But and obviously Ace is still very kind of polarizing, but as
Right.
as high as 3 on a lot of boards. But I think VJ is right up there as just an uber athlete with defensive instincts, can hit the 3, that change of pace, quick burst. I mean, there's just a ton to like. So definitely glad we shouted him out here. And then yeah, I was asking you about it. You got to see Egor Demin as well. In
Yeah, no,
person.
great. First of all, I agree with everything you said on VJ. That's great stuff. And yeah, with Yegor Demin, different evaluation process. Somebody that I've been familiar with for a little while, but I didn't see him until the season started in person. And I was at their first game in Provo, and he blew me away. Obviously, some of those early games, he blew all of us away. I mean, I think most of us put him top 5. I was right there with everybody else. Maybe even driving the train a bit, but and he struggled. It's been a very up and down year with him, and it's it's what I mentioned before as far as like comparing to the evaluation of Cooper Flag. I'm very comfortable with who Cooper Flag is as a prospect. Yegor, I have mixed feelings on him every single day. I go back and forth because of what he does well. He's extremely great at. And this is a 6'9" playmaker and one of the best natural passers I've ever seen. His issues are concerning, and I'm really juggling. How much is he going to be able to address some of these things? I mean, the lack of strength. I do think he'll be able to improve there, which would probably address his game as a whole. But the lack of quickness is a thing. I do not see him being able to be a point guard in the NBA. And so if you're having to take him off the ball some, how much value does he lose? And that's something I'm juggling. And I don't have the clear cut answer yet. I do think the shooting will be there. And I question his mental toughness a little bit too. He's not a natural alpha dog, and so I'm on the fence. I still have him at number 9, and he's kind of the kid where it's like at certain moments I'm like, is he a top 5 guy still? Do I have him too low? And then at other times I'm like, do I have him too high? And I struggle. I struggle with Egor, but I'm still very intrigued by him. But he's a hard eval right now.
Yeah, that's some good points because some people have kind of pointed out that maybe the early season success was a little lower competition, and then he started playing maybe in the higher conferences and kind of had a few more down games. But I'm with you on the flashes that we've seen from him, like especially those first few games. Like something on the scouting process that I forgot to mention earlier is I probably prioritize the player's strengths that I think will translate to the league. And if he can do X, Y, and Z well, is there a role like that you could envision in the league when essentially if you're not an on-ball star scorer at the NBA level, you probably have to have very few holes in your game and be an all-around guy, especially that can stretch the floor, defend your own position, and then dribble, pass, and shoot, make good decisions, just be a team first, quick processing guy. Ideally, obviously not everyone is all of those things, but as many of those things as possible, have as few holes in your game as possible. And like you said, having someone on the ball who's a great passer and creator for others is a lot different than someone standing in the corner who doesn't get to use any of those skills because they're not quite good enough to be the star, even though they are good enough to be a facilitator. So it's an interesting dynamic there of kind of on the draft as a whole, where I've talked on the pod before, where at the top of the draft, I feel like you are star hunting still. Like you're looking for potential. You're looking for potential, like how I go from all NBA potential to all star, all defense. Kind of after that is where I'm looking for, and then just after there's a line in every draft I say where you stop looking for potential star hunting and you start looking for good basketball players. And maybe obviously there's a mix of that with every player. So it's kind of up to the evaluator where they decide and land on those things and prioritize those things. But it's probably not productive to just like look at a guy and say he looks like a star, even though he's not producing like a star and probably won't be at the next level, but he does star things. So maybe I can talk myself into it versus like, why not just take, that's kind of what killed like Franz Wagner back in the draft was he was, everyone thought he maxed out his potential. Like he had a high floor who was just a 6'10" good basketball player. And it's like, well, he's put that sum of parts together. And not only is he a good basketball player, but he continues to develop. He's a quick processor. He makes winning plays, and he's 6'10" who can run pick and rolls. So it's like he just surprised all of us really, and to have more potential than meets the eye. So it's an interesting kind of dynamic in the evaluation process. And before I asked you, I was going to ask you about a few other players, but I would love to hear about who I mentioned earlier, Joan Berenger, and my apologies if I said that name wrong, but I'm not as familiar with his game. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, what you like. Why do you have him rated as a first round pick?
Yes, I believe it's Joan Berenger, and he's a very interesting prospect. And from my understanding, he hasn't played basketball that long, but this guy's got a big time frame, mobile, and I think he's really just kind of scratching the surface of what he can become. Of just being sort of like this modern athletic, sort of pretty well-rounded big man. I think I saw ESPN has him as like a late lottery, I think, in their latest rankings. And so he does seem like he's on the rise. He's somebody that I would say that I'm more intrigued with right now, rather than having full comprehensive evaluation. But he's somebody that I'm going to continue digging on. And I would not be surprised if he kind of gradually moves up boards.
Yeah, and another prospect, maybe in a similar mold. Obviously, like I just said, I'm not overly familiar with him, but Noah Essengue with Ulm. is
Mhm.
another, tall, lanky prospect that, everyone wants to make a comp to a superstar. So it's like, well, maybe he'll be the Giannis of the draft, who gets picked 15th and just explodes because he grows a few inches and starts bringing the ball up the floor and all that. So I was wondering, how would you kind of compare the potential between those two prospects, and what makes Noah maybe 10 slots higher, give or take, on your book?
Yeah, I mean, I think they should be in the same category because both young, sort of upside, projected international players. I see Berenger more as a true big. Essengue, I think that's how you say it. He's interesting. I mean, he's really young. I mean, he's already doing some really great things at a high level. They're in Germany. He needs to get a lot stronger, but this guy's very fluid for a 6'10" guy. He's already shooting threes. I mean, kind of projecting him in this modern NBA of being this switchable, mobile guy that could, do a number of different things. And I really like what you said before, as far as looking at these different attributes guys have that sort of provide safety in a guy as a prospect. And I even look at that with the high profile guys because I mean, the fact of the matter is, we all fall into this trap of like comparing these top 10 type guys to star players because that's why they're there. They have the upside of becoming, all star level guys, sort of, drivers for teams winning games. And the harsh reality is a lot of these top rated guys are going to end up being role players. And so, I think about that quite a bit is, okay, if this guy does not maximize his potential and be one of the top two or three guys on a team, can he fill a role and be more of a complementary guy? And in a lot of cases, it's a no. And for me, that provides a lot of uncertainty of how much safety is in that pick. I think with a guy like Essengue, the upside's there. I mean, he's naturally just scratching the surface of what he can become because of how young he is, and I think he's got sort of package of attributes that would suggest that he can be a complimentary guy. And shoot, maybe you get more out of him. Maybe he's got star potential, right? And so I think sort of that sort of area of unknown and upside that makes him an exciting prospect because it's just like, okay, we've got a guy who's probably a high floor with an extremely high ceiling, and that's an interesting prospect.
Absolutely, and that's a great point too of just prioritizing, what a lot of people probably call a high floor or just a safe role, predicting a role, and that's those reasons are probably why I have Asa Newell rated so high. I view his like just floor really high, I guess, between the defensive versatility that I got to see at Mount Verde to now the offensive rebounding, the quick second jump. I think he's like the best offensive rebounder in college by the numbers, and he also shows he can he's flashed enough of a 3 point shot, I think, to think the pick and pop is there, and then he can also attack the closeout. He might, we'll see how the passing kind of develops from there. I'd say that's probably one of his weaknesses, but being able to just attack and maybe counter instead of just driving every time, he has a really nice post up footwork hook shot combination where he, I don't think any offense at the NBA level is just going to run a bunch of post ups through him or anything like that, but more so in today's game, but more so just he just seems like the ultimate complementary piece to any team where he can play defense, he can guard multiple positions, protect the rim, crash the glass, hit the open three, maybe counter a post up move here and there with a hook shot. So that's why I end up so high on him because, like you said, like a lot of these, if 8 of the 10 top 10 picks end up as role players, who's got the clearest high floor here to contribute wherever he ends up, and that's kind of where I end up with him. And I also wanted to ask you about two guards with that. I think both of their special skill is probably their quick first step burst, and that's Jeremiah Fears and Boogie Fland, who obviously went down with an injury, so it's probably not going to help his draft stock missing out on March Madness. But you have him 15th here. He's been looked at as a lottery pick level talent for most of the season. And we'll see how that kind of shakes out now that he doesn't get to actually play on the biggest stage. And there's always late risers that have a good run and might jump them in because of that. But I was wondering what do you see in Boogie and Fears to have them both as lottery picks at the next level, and also on their do you have any concerns on their defense? Because that's probably where I always end up with small guards is like if if you're not a star scorer at the next level, you might just be a six man if all you do is score and you're not really providing much defense or passing and safe role player things that we've hit on already.
No, sure. And first of all, I agree with everything you said on Ace and Newell too. I'm very high on Ace. I've got him number 7. I think I've had him in that range since October, our first big board of the year. And really on all your points, and I think he's scratching the surface. Because he really hasn't got his body together yet. And when that kid gets stronger, I think ultimately, looking 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about a guy that can legitimately play the 4 or the 5. And I think the swing skill is the shooting. And to your point, he's shooting enough right now that to give me confidence that he's going to shoot enough to where you have to guard him, provide good spacing. And if he's able to turn himself into a guy that's shooting 35 to 40, watch out. I mean, this guy could be a prime time. Even though I do think he'll be sort of in a complimentary role, he has a chance of becoming one of those like elite complimentary role type guys. If he's shooting at a high clip, oh my gosh. Anyway,
that kind of is where I end up with him in like an Aaron Gordon comp kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's the role that I think he could.
Yeah, no, for sure. A different player, but I see what you mean as far as value and how they would fit on a team. I absolutely love Ace. I'd be shocked if he got out of the lottery, and I know he's a little bit all over the place on different big boards and mock drafts. I'd be surprised if he slipped too far. But anyway, to address the guards, I know both those guys very well. I know both of their families. I've followed these kids since they're really young in high school, and you feel very comfortable. As far as who they are as people and as players, very, very different styles of play. To start with Jeremiah Fears, what screams out to me first is he's tough as heck. I mean, just tough as nails. Since high school, he's grown quite a bit. I mean, they list him at 6'4" now, and he's young. I think he just turned 18 during the season, and he's hard to guard. I mean, in the pick and roll, I think that his usage at Oklahoma is really high, and he's forcing down your throat. And what's interesting, that's changed since my evaluation of him in high school when he was at AZ Compass Prep is I saw the shooting early, and in Oklahoma, everything's more to the whole putting pressure on the defense, getting to his spots, and so. That being said, I do have hope that like the outside shooting, we're just sort of seeing the beginning of where that's where he's going to become. And if that guy's shooting at a higher level, I mean, now that opens all up, especially if we're talking about an NBA game that's spread out more. And it's just a kid. I mean, this guy's going to get stronger. He's going to become more mature mentally and physically. I see him having the upside of being a lead guard that's very dynamic and he provides that like sort of alpha dog approach, which every team needs. And I think he's probably good enough to at least have the potential to foresee him in a role of being one of the primary guys on a team. So very high on Jeremiah Fears. Boogie Fland, I know he's polarizing, and I think part of it is smaller guards are written off quickly these days, and I get why. I mean, you brought up the defensive stuff. It's a problem on some level or another. Another thing with Boogie that I think has held him back a little bit is how he was used in a lot of teams in high school. He was used as more of an off-ball scorer rather than a point guard. And I think a lot of that was because of the guys he was playing with, like his high school team, Archbishop Stepanak. He played with Danny Carbuccia, who's a smaller on-ball guard. And so they kind of used Boogie as a two-guard essentially by default. And I think he got kind of labeled as being this non-point guard. And while he's certainly a scoring point guard, I think he could be a dang good one that could have a nice balance of create off the dribble. I mean, he is quick as heck, very bursty, change of pace. I'm a big believer in his shooting. And he's a dynamic shooter. I think his shot selection can be questionable at times. He's got a quick trigger, but it's part of what makes him hard to guard. And so having this vision of his upside being somebody sort of in the mold of Darius Garland makes me very excited. And obviously, a lot of things need to happen right for him to click and and sort of maximize his potential. But I do think the potential is that high just because of the shooting, the scoring ability, the dynamic ability to do things with the ball in his hands, while also being somebody that can provide value off the ball as a shooter. And I think looking at sort of roster construction in the NBA, there's a lot of star players that probably shouldn't be penciled in as primary ball handlers that you want your offense running through, right? So I mean, imagine putting a guy like whether it be like even like a Luca, right? I mean, put Luca where the ball's in his hands. You could have a guy like Boogie playing off of him, where it's like, okay, he's creating on the ball at times, taking some pressure off of your star player, but then he's also sort of could kind of fall into that off ball shooter floor spacer, and so that's where I'm higher on Boogie than a lot of people are. And I'm not ignoring the fact that he's smaller and that defensively, although that he's got some great instincts and feistiness, and he's a hawk on the ball. As far as just being a one-on-one on-ball defender, there's in the lack of switchability that creates some potential problems. Just that offensive upside though, just keeps me there with Boogie.
Right. It sounds like a role, and not calling him, not comping at all, but like a role that Kyrie has seen and
Yeah,
found success in with, next to Luca, like you mentioned, or next to LeBron, where, he can just take over the offense a little bit. He can also spot up off of them and just kind of instantly go back and forth and be
right.
scalable in that sense to an offense. And, so with some players, you do have to kind of build out lineups that are balanced. So if you have to cover up some defense here, but you're overpowered offensively there, then maybe that's enough to win possessions and come out positive through the game. So before we head out here, are there any other prospects that really pop out in your mind that you really love in this class and that we didn't quite get to?
Nobody off the top of my head. I mean, I do really like this draft. I think one thing that I'm really trying to get a grip on is after that top four. What does that next grouping look like? I'm not real comfortable with where I'm at right now. I mean, I've got, like most everybody else, Jokic Jonas. I've got him at 5. I'm not confident in that. I really like the kid, but I've got questions of, okay, the lack of quickness. How big of an issue is that? And that's an open-ended question. I'm going to the Big Ten tournament. I'm going to the Big East tournament too, and so I've got this next stretch is going to be important. For me to really kind of sort of establish my individual evaluations on guys. That's just one example of a guy that I feel like I've got more work to do. Of like, okay, I know the consensus is that he's right around that 5 area. Same idea with a guy like Trey Johnson. Like, where do I have him? I've been higher on him than a lot of people. But I think we're kind of getting to that point of the year where, at least for myself, I'm needing to kind of be a little bit bolder as we kind of do these next sort of versions of our big boards, and when we convert it to a mock draft. So it's a pretty interesting time of year. I think a lot of change will be in my will reflect in my boards coming up.
There it is. Yeah, it's always interesting, like just the process of trying to get everything right the first time, and then a month later you look at it and like, it's what was I thinking, or
Right.
things just change fast, and it's trying not to overrate the game that you just saw last, or the last month of games, and everything we've hit on, from like the full sample size and the full development cycle, as much info as you can get to try to come up with it, so you're not, not you, but anyone is not just, looking at a March Madness game and saying, oh, well, he won 3 games and dropped 30 a game. He must be just a walking bucket and needs to be a
Sure.
top 20 pick because of those last few games I saw. So it's super interesting evaluation process. I know I got to do the same thing. I would say I have been won over by, say, like the Danny Wolf hype. Like I'm all in on this prospect as like just a creator at 7 foot. But I probably need to really examine some of the flaws that might not allow him to be an on-ball creator at the next level. But in terms
Sure.
of
No,
just
that's a guy too that I've seen what everybody else has seen. The intrigue is there, and one part of my process too. I mentioned that I always try and simulate being a general manager in the NBA, right? Looking at each decision I'm making as far as where they go in the draft, kind of taking that same approach. And with that, I don't prioritize being first. I don't care to be, okay, I'm the first guy to figure them out. At this day and age, there really aren't hidden gems, and so to me, like our big board in October, I know it'll end up being shit when we look at it in hindsight, right? But it's just, I think if you're somebody that follows my stuff in any draft cycle, it's a journey. I mean, I travel around going to these games because there's work to do. If I had it all figured out, I'd stay at home and just hang with my family. But it's it's a process, and sort of what I prioritize is by draft night. I've got a grip on what's going on, and I do my best to kind of pinpoint what these guys are all about.
That's a great point. Just trying to, understand the pros and cons of guys. And, with Wolf, like I said before, like I think the strengths are pretty definable there. Like you can see a 7-foot point guard running pick and rolls, quick processor, impressive handle, and has shown some tough shot making and shooting it from the 3-point level as well. So it's kind of like the flashes of star potential that pull you in. And then you got to kind of correlate everything else we're talking about with the high floor and what 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 can he do to stay on the floor at the next level, and like is he good enough at all the little things to do that. But that it's kind of a fun, it's kind of funny to look at because I just talk about all the high floor safety of an Asa Newell, where I love the potential there and the floor. And also in my top 5 at the moment is Wolf, where I'm just like I'm all in on the hype, and that could change because I think there are safer prospects. But in terms of star hunting, like there's just something special there that skill wise that you don't really see very often in a 7-footer that I think is worth keeping an eye on. But maybe that just turns into a later lottery, high risk, high reward type swing.
Yeah, no, like I said, I'm really looking forward to. I haven't seen him in person yet, and so I'm really excited to check him out in Indianapolis. He's one of the probably the highest guy on my list as far as guys I need to go and lock in on. I currently have him at 30, and to be honest with you, a lot of it is I haven't done the level of work that I need to feel comfortable of doing something extremely bold. And I'm okay with being late to the party as long as I get there.
Right. There it is. I mean, that's how the evaluation works. And yeah, I think as long as you're bored and you're comfortable with it by draft day, and some people even wait until the actual draft happens and then they actually see the team context that these guys will be in, and then they redo another board because obviously like we all make these big boards that are great for an aggregate, like a consensus, like the best available player on the draft at each slot as they get taken. But every team is different. They all prioritize
Right.
different things. They have different roles, situations where one guy might thrive with one team and be a bench warmer on the other team. And it all comes down to the fit and the talent. And
Oh, there's no doubt. And it's really frustrating for me. Doing a big board, I think, is much harder than doing a mock draft for that reason. And I typically don't do mock drafts during the season because I just feel like it feels a little sloppy. And I get it that it generates a lot of interest. I mean, it's clickbait to a certain extent, right? And but so I prefer doing it. I'll start a mock draft once the NBA season's getting close to an end, and have a good idea of where teams are going to be selecting. And that's I like doing these rankings a lot more when we get into the pre-draft process because obviously we've had a whole season to really kind of dive deep in on these guys, and then I start gathering more intel as well. But yeah, to your point, I think fit does make a big difference as far as pathways to success for guys.
Yeah, and that idea is why I have ended up doing when I cover the Magic. So when I cover the draft, I try to do like an Orlando Magic perspective big board. So I prioritize their strengths and weaknesses and their wants and needs and what would help them. So maybe a guy is 5 slots higher on their board that compared to a consensus. So it just factors into the decision the actual team will actually make instead of just what we all hypothetically think at this point in their career. This guy's better than that guy, so he's got to be higher on my board versus where they could actually end up and with the decisions. But super interesting podcast today, talking with you, and just really appreciate you hopping on, sharing your perspective, your journey, your path, and can't wait to see where you end up on this board. You gotta let me know your thoughts on seeing Danny Wolf in person and the rest of some of these other guys in person, no doubt. But I appreciate you taking the time today, man.
No, I appreciate having me. This is great. You do a great job. Honestly, I'm very impressed by it. And anything I do to help you, just let me know.
Hey, no doubt. And down to talk hoops anytime. Thanks for taking the time, man.
Yeah, take care.
With Ryan. Learning Basketball is a Swiss Theory podcast hosted from Beyond the Arcade. Hey, that's me. You can find my work on Twitter, YouTube, Substack,
and check out the team's writing at theswishtheory.com.